It's Spoilerin time. This is the show that goes along with Cordkillers. On Cordkillers, we talk about how to watch all the cool stuff, then we watch it, and we talk about it on Spoilerin time. This week, we're going to talk about Season 3, Episode 8 of Deadwood, the first episode of The Return in Season 4 of Better Call Saul, the 8th episode of Season 3 of Preacher. I'm Tom Merritt. Joining me is Brian Brushwood. And Brian, we have a fantastic guest today.
You're right. In fact, let me put on my bunny ears because it's the editor-in-chief of BunnyEars.com, one Sean DePasquale, with his customized bunny ears. I'm going to customize my ears, and then I'll show you, sir. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Here's the important thing is right before we went live, I explained that we do a silly thing called the Summer Movie Draft.
So
they did it. They did
Mission Impossible Fallout made $161 million. Team John Trekker is in first with more than $1 million. I'm still in second.
What? You said million. I think you meant billion.
A billion. Yes. No, sorry. I didn't mean to minimize their accomplishment. $1 billion. So really, it comes down to this. Crazy Rich Asians is coming out August 17th. Will it make $700 million to propel Team Tell It Anyway into first place?
I think at this point we can crown all of our champions. X-Modem has been in the lead of the Chat Realm League for a very long time. $1.28 billion. Again, I don't understand how it always happens that there's one singular winner out of the thousands of people that compete in the Chat Realm League. That's amazing.
It's pretty great. We only have two more movies after Crazy Rich Asians too. Slender Man and Replicas both come out August 24th, and that will wrap up. And of course, there's the 4-week grace period for Replicas to keep bringing in the money to propel Team Cordkillers back up to the top. But yeah, congratulations, Team John Trekker.
Question, Tom. Team Tell It Anyway seemed very, very confident that Crazy Rich Asians was going to make all the money in the plan.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a question there.
And?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I don't know. Do you believe them? Do you believe, where do you think it's going to end up?
I'm sure it'll do just fine. It's got 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, according to my wife.
Okay. Eh.
As a complete outsider to what's just happened, I have to say that was like tripping on mushrooms so hard and knowing words that you're hearing and like having some context, but also not being able to connect any of the.
Sounds like just like that was a movie name, I think.
I know all of these movies, but what are they talking? Did they make that much money? What? Huh? What's a chat?
The amount of the money made amounts were real. But then we also talked about the point amounts based on money for teams, which was really confusing.
Yeah. And by the way, now's a good time to make the pitch. We're looking for teams for the winter movie draft. Basically, you get 6 teams of 2 people, each representing hopefully a different podcast. We all have 100 movie or game dollars, and then we basically bid how much we think each movie is worth in terms of box office receipts. And we're at the very end of it, so it's kind of boring now. But I would love it if you guys wanted to represent Team Bunny Ears and actually compete with us.
Yeah, I can't speak for the podcast, but website, we'll put all our heads together and you send us the list or what. I don't know how to do. I don't like football nor know anything about it.
I'll send you a link. Yeah, but you know movies though, and you know
I love
you
movies.
pick movies you think are going to make the most money. You get a point for every dollar they make domestic gross.
Right.
Oh, I'll kill at this.
But also you have to fake out other teams. You have to overbid things.
There's an auction
because it's an auction. You have to overbid things that you feel like other players are going to bite on, so that they waste their money while secretly it's garbage. But then you run the risk of like, oh wait, now I'm holding garbage because I won. So anyway, we'll get you guys in on this.
That's
all right. Let's move on to Preacher, episode 8 in season 3. We finally get to Osaka, and
twice. twice. We get they fake us out, right? Because we have the dream sequence of Grandma, who I almost believe
right. That's not in Osaka, but as if they've already been there and come back already.
Correct, and like it was just long enough for me to buy, and I was like, man, Grandma's looking good. And then of course it's a dream, and then she's old and dying or whatever, and then she snaps her fingers, and Satan shows up, and they have a casual conversation. By the way,
my wife is half watching, so when they actually come back and they're in Osaka, she's like, wait, didn't that girl die? I'm like, no, that was a dream sequence.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Satan as a super cool manager is my favorite character in all of actually the two power dynamics that I love the most is Satan trying to be like the cool youth pastor, and Hair Star being like a company man who really wants things to be shaken up but feels powerless to do anything about it. Those are my two favorite things. On top of that, the set design, just everything is so beautiful about this show. Everybody is playing at the top of their game. The actors, the writing, the characters, as we talked about before. It's great. It's my 40 minutes of absolute bliss and joy where the whole world goes away for a moment, and I just indulge in a nonsense fantasy mashup bizarreness that understand. And my favorite moment, Sean, we've talked about this before, is how often characters go out of their way to say exactly what they're almost certain the audience is thinking, and then immediately subvert that expectation.
Yes. Yeah, the show is very, very smart, and I love how far they've been willing. The comic takes each character into their own very bizarre places, and like they've really done a remarkable job. Like when I noticed for a couple of episodes this season that Star was always wearing a hat at a certain point, and I got very excited. And my girlfriend who watches the show with me was like, I kept going like, haha, the hat. And she was like, I don't get it. And then I was like, just wait. And I didn't want to spoil for her that one of my absolute favorite parts of the comic is that he gets the shot down the middle of his head. And for the remainder of the book, they refer to his head as looking like a dick, because it does. It looks like a little penis. And they do so many worse things to so many different characters and each other, and just and it makes me very excited to see them start to dip their toe into really like embracing those moments, and I'm happy to hear that Star is one of the characters you like best, because that's one of the best characters in the whole book without question.
I think what I love the most is that he is legitimately unassailably sinister in season 2. Like he is a definite, like the worst of the bad, of the scariest of the whatever, very credible. And then in season 3, to realize there's somebody over him and to see him through gritted teeth, number one, impotent to cause change in his organization and desperately begging anybody to help change his situation, is fantastic. It's amazing.
But what you'll notice is there's a masochism to him in the second season when you first meet him that you kind of write off as like, oh, this is just like a quirk of this. He's like really evil, and and this is like a weird quirk. But then you start to realize that also is like part of like that forever punishment of having to work underneath, the Allfather is part of his weird kink, and like it gets so like complicated, but always it's like steeped in like this like gross sexuality. Everyone's got like a gross level of sexuality to them, and it's wonderful. It's pulled right from the books.
Well, and amazingly, none of it is overdone. Where it's not like the moment when he says casually in season 2, like, oh, I think I'll have a spot of rape, and you're like, got it. And then there's that misunderstanding of which side of the rape he wants to be on, and and it's just like, oh well, what are you gonna do? It's I think of everything in the show. I love the respect that it gives the audience to figure out what traditionally would be the next phase in order to, subvert it. But as far as this episode, Tom, we've got I don't know. I guess what Hitler and Arseface get captured. So what?
Yeah, not much happens on that front. I mean, basically, the devil sends his henchwoman off to capture Tulip, and we really only see Hilter and Arseface show up at the bus stop when she's got the wrong person because Tulip cleverly misdirects her.
That's the other thing. Shockingly simple to fool. This top level sinister bad guy. And then
my favorite part of this episode is the Osaka stuff. I mean, it's a great episode up and down, but the HR presentation where Tulip's like, there was an easier way to do this, right? And she's like, yeah, but then, I wouldn't get to embarrass you.
There's nothing I love more. There are two things I love the most in all of television or movies or anything. Actors who are portraying characters who are portraying other characters. And in this case, second place goes to actors who are good at acting portraying bad acting. And and that whole vignette was amazing in that regard.
Yeah, I thought that was excellent, and it's one of the things that I like best that the show deviates from the comic is that it really allows itself to have more fun than the comic kind of did. The comic keeps moving and it takes itself pretty seriously, and like it's definitely over the top and ridiculous and like crazy things happen, but it doesn't have as much fun as the series allows itself to have. And I think that makes some of the horribleness like more palpable to an audience that maybe it wouldn't have been you wouldn't have been able to handle it quite as much as in
speaking of which, before we move on to the vampire situation, I guess Satan was never in the comic book like that.
Not once.
Not at all. How do you feel about him in the movie being somebody who loves the comic book?
I love it so much. I think it's a great addition. It makes so much sense to me. I can't believe that. I feel like Garth Ennis is probably like, of course Satan would be there. Because and I think actually you do see a demon at one point in the one of the first books. I really liked that you got the story of Genesis finally, like direct from someone, like really telling you flat out like what Genesis is and talking about it in some context. And I think that while there were demons portrayed, Satan never had a major role, but God always did. So it just makes sense to me that why wouldn't you go with Satan as a character?
Well, and it's now that you're mentioning this, I'm hitting this for the first time. You have God, the ultimate power in the universe, being portrayed as a dude bro having a midlife crisis. And you have Satan, the opposite of God, loving his role in middle management, basically. That's astonishing. All right.
Yeah, and it makes sense. It seems like it's a thread that I don't know if Garth Ennis tried to pull it and never really wanted to go down that road or just had more to tell. But it just makes so much sense for him to have such a significant role to play, and it's tied him nicely into Grandma and her whole thing. And I am a big fan of all of the changes they made. I didn't love parts of the second season. I felt like it dragged its feet a little bit.
Wait, which parts?
I just felt like we spent a little too much time with Cassidy's son. And I thought that storyline could have been truncated and just as effective. And I also thought that storyline would have been more effective if it happened further into the series, where in the comic you get a very different story, but a similar outcome, basically a similar lesson learned for Cassidy. Only it happens way later, and it means more because you know more about Cassidy at that point. So I don't know, that for me felt a little out of place.
I wonder if you're suffering from a little bit of the curse of knowledge of knowing what the alternate version in the comic book looked like, because I know for me, it felt just right. Tom, I never got bored of the bizarreness of having an old man as as one's son and wrestling with the ethical conundrum of giving your son what he wants, but also your son's, kind of a chump, and how to deal with that.
Yeah, it was a compelling storyline from what I remember. I just it's been so long. But nothing stuck out to me. But again, same thing. I didn't read the comic.
So
interesting. Which
brings us back to Cassidy and specifically the narrative of him and his new beau. I love the twist of taking the weakest member of the Grail family and imbuing him with power. We know he has power now, and I don't think any of us really thought he was about to get burned alive or whatever. I think we knew this was a turning point.
As Preacher goes, it was a pretty mechanical storyline. We're like, oh, Cassidy's catching on. Oh, the Grail guy is getting turned, and that we know he's going to stick around. So nothing terribly shocking there.
But I love the fact that the weakest member of the Grail family is now very powerful, very much alive. Cassidy has figured out what Lestat is up to, and I like the fact that we have a brand new, real battle between the two, because this is not over. Like the two of them have to figure out a way to end this, and
Cassidy's less powerful.
Correct. He's less powerful, but also scrappier. One is privileged and upper crust 1%, and meanwhile Cassidy, we know, will do whatever it takes to make something happen. I couldn't be happier. Could not be happier with everything I'm seeing here, and I think this is a weird thing I'm about to say out loud. I like the fact that they're putting just enough Hitler in this season. Enough to keep me excited every time I see him, and Arseface and all that stuff, but not so much as to make him familiar and make me actually empathize one way or the other. Like, he's this giant human question mark, and I like that about him.
Well, I think they did a really good thing in the first episode, the first time we saw really Hitler, right? This season in any real capacity, where it was like you were almost like, man, are they gonna try to make me sympathetic for him? And then he flat out was just like, so we have to go back to my original plan, which is to murder all of the Jews because that's the problem. And you're like, oh, cool. He's still garbage.
Yes.
He's just garbage. Hitler is a new addition, and Hoover getting superpowers or getting vampire powers is a new addition, as far as to the mythos compared to the where the book takes. Hoover goes in a completely different direction than where he is right now. But
because it felt to me like they're always they're riffing on Tom Cruise as Lestat the entire time. But
So it's interesting. When they went to New Orleans last season, I thought, oh, they're going to do the New Orleans a bit where Cassidy meets other vampires. And then that didn't happen. And I was like, oh, they missed the best part of New Orleans. How could they have done that? So when he went back to New Orleans, I got very excited. And I was like, oh, please let this be it. And they're playing it out in exactly the way that it worked in the book. But again, what I like about this show is just when I start to feel like, okay, well, at least when we shift to this storyline, I know exactly what's going to happen here. But then Hoover shows up, who's the other henchman, right?
Yeah.
And gets bit and becomes a and like all the way up until the moment he bit him, I was like, I'm thinking there's no way it doesn't. It's like not how it goes. And so then when they bid him, I was, once again, I was like, oh, this is awesome. I'm in new territory again. And I'm just as excited to figure out how they're going to pay all this off, but still manage to stay true again to these elements that cling very closely to what I love.
What you're describing, and we've talked about this on the show with Tom before, is my favorite part of a movie is when we get to the part where I'm past what I saw in the previews and I honestly don't know what's going to happen next. And it sounds like that's what you're describing.
Well, what's cool, but that is what I like about Preacher is I get elements of that every season, but I also get to feel that familiar, like when you get to see an adaptation of a book you love and you're like, yeah, this is the scene I've been waiting to see. My whole life I wanted to see this happen live. And it was like, that is what makes Preacher for a a comic fan of the series so like perfect, is that they managed to like balance those moments.
And last thing on my end, and then Tom, whatever you got, but like we keep talking about the arms race of the chess game to keep surprising you or whatever. And one of the tools they have is wonderful execution, and coming in from the commercial break and hearing the Blue Danube waltz and then watching Christ after Christ after Christ explode just was so transgressive and so forgive me for saying beautifully executed that it was just like, how does this show exist? This is amazing.
That scene took me back to the fight in the hotel with the angels, and like I think the first season. First season. The moment that I sat up and I was like, oh, this show is gonna be it. Like they're gonna. I don't care what everyone's saying and the complaints, but like this show, they have it figured out. They just need a little bit of time to tell their story, and like, boy, did they deliver.
Right.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Preacher before we move on?
I mean, none for me. It sounds like you don't have much on the outside of that. You liked it.
Yep. All right, Brian, we're going to spoil you on the season premiere of Better Call Saul.
Live spoiling. I'm going to shut up, and you three are going to talk. In fact, Bryce, if you're able, you could even take me off screen. I just want to hear.
Bryce has watched it, and Sean, you've watched it as well, right?
So I saw the first episode.
Yeah. So we talked when we were setting up the lineup for the show that Brian probably wouldn't feel bad if we spoiled it, because this episode is really the aftermath of the events of the third season finale, right? Where
so we've got the burned out husk of the house. We've
Chuck's
got
house.
The call that comes in to let Jimmy know that this has happened. We've got the anger at what happened, and then we've got a few revelations to each other. We as the audience know the whole picture, but the pieces start to get filled in. And I thought it was really elegantly done how they kind of conducted the ballet of Jimmy feeling angry and upset until he finds out why that his brother was despondent, and it's directly related to something Jimmy did. And I feel like this whole series we've been waiting to see how Saul Goodman comes about, and this was one major piece when he cheered up at that news.
Yeah. Do you think this is the turning point? Because
I mean, it's not the turning point, but it's another piece. It's another nudge.
Yeah. And I think that storyline is otherwise pretty neatly, like that storyline was probably the majority of the episode, I would say, more than Mike's storyline, but it definitely was a very simple story.
Well, and it's not entirely wrapped up, because it's going to come out that Jimmy was the one that tipped them off about the insurance.
Do you think? Because right now only Jimmy knows that.
Well, yeah, Jimmy and the insurance agent, right? So if this being Better Call Saul, I feel like it may not be Chekhov's gun exactly, but that's a thing that's waiting to come out, and somebody's going to be upset about it.
I guess I wonder who gets upset. Like, would Hamlin? Like, do you? Like, maybe Hamlin. I think his girlfriend more likely, though. Yeah, though she didn't seem to like Chuck much either. Though I think she's got enough morals to not want the guy dead.
Yeah, but I don't think that it's about how much she disliked Chuck as much as like how much it will break her heart to learn who he isn't, who she isn't, who he isn't, who she thinks he is. Yeah, and I think that ultimately, that because like that's the biggest question for me of this series as a huge Breaking Bad fan, as I continue to watch Better Call Saul, is like, where does her character end up? Because obviously, there's no way he hasn't lost her to be in the position that he's in by the time we see him in Breaking Bad, right? So the real game of the show is to constantly be spinning that plate to go like, does he lose her because of this? Does he lose her because of that? Is she going to get murdered? Is it flat out heartbreak? I tend to think that killing her is a little too on the nose for the way these writers write. So I think that what we'll see is we'll just see we will see this slow degradation of her trust in him, and we'll see him time and time again have the opportunity to to change what he's doing and go down a better path for her. But each time I think we will see him take a larger and larger step away from her until he finally makes the choice to leave her behind. And I think that's ultimately going to be the tragedy of this character is that he allowed himself to become this through, I mean, you know what, we've seen ego and bitterness and all of these things that, like, yes, life is bad for him and life does take big craps on him, but there's also like an ego there that he can't let go of, you know, and like I think that's ultimately what will be his undoing, in much the way it was Walt's undoing.
Yeah, it's a ratchet effect, right? He keeps pushing it too far, and she either reels him in or makes excuses, and at some point that breaks. I feel like the metaphor is their game in the bar, where they're like, let's pretend and let's, you know, try to fool this person. And then at a certain point, it's always Kim that goes, but we're not actually going to do it, right? We're not actually going to sign. She's the one that always pulls them back. And I think you're absolutely right, Sean. There's going to be a point where Jimmy just says, well, no, I'm really going to do this. And if that means I lose you, I guess it means I lose you.
So for the rest of this season, because I think if you look at both Jimmy and Mike's storyline, which I think we should talk about next, both of them seem to be in a place of relief, right? Like they, for better or for worse, they are both free of various stressors, right? Chuck on Jimmy's side, but also this money that Mike, you know, now has going through Madrigal. I think we see part of what Mike's storyline will be, which is to find value for this free money that he's being, you know, getting cleaned. But I don't know what stands in the way of Jimmy this season, other than like not being able to be a lawyer for a year.
Right.
Like, I don't know what his next conflict could be. And that's exciting, kind of.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a risk that they can take on this show, that because they have the benefit of, we know where it's going to end up, and they also have these future forward sequences where we're sticking around really to find out where he ends up, right? Because like there's a big element of that too, where it's like I'll watch the show just to see those clips every season, right?
Speaking of which, every beginning and end of the season, they've done those future forward moments. Does that happen in this one as well?
Yeah, they have about 10 minutes of it.
Okay, so let me ask Sean, and nobody believes me on this because I called this, and I keep reminding everyone because when it happens, I want everybody to know that I called it from the beginning.
Okay.
I am convinced that Better Call Saul at some point gets ahead of Breaking Bad and becomes his story. Like there is a season or a part of a season or whatever that, actually, as I'm saying it, it sounds like
true. No, you're
no
right.
one's fighting you on it though either.
Brian.
Nobody's fighting you. Come on. Carry on, Brian. Carry on.
I actually agree. Believe in yourself. I think that the twist here, everyone assumes that the twist here is that this will eventually catch up and we'll see, you know, where he's gone since. But we lost sight of him at a certain point during Breaking Bad. And I think that what we're actually seeing, I think at a certain point what you'll see on the news, he will find out that Walt has died. But
and it will have like maybe a full season of what happens before we go to black and white, similar to Memento, right? Where it's like all the black and white parts were in forward progression and everything else was backwards or whatever. I think we're going to Better Call Saul will go past Breaking Bad. It will be essentially both a prequel and a sequel.
The color from the show, I believe, will desaturate at a certain point.
Oh, that would be great.
We will see, I think, as he moves into this world deeper and deeper. If I were making that show, my final moment of that show when he becomes Saul Goodman would be a complete desaturation to black and white into the final sequence of where he currently is.
I would like to believe that at some point we start off with one of those black and white vignettes of him, a defeated piece of garbage in Minnesota or whatever. Okay. And then we see color come in, and then we see a redemptive arc from that point forward. Like, how amazing would that be? That
maybe.
Anyway,
what if Kim
she comes back?
knocks
She
out
comes back.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
And
thinking.
steps
That's
into
how
his
this
shop.
ends. Is the two of them find each other long after their own crazy journeys and come back together.
I'm not sure about full seasons that are either parallel with Breaking Bad or in the future, in the black and white period, but wrapping up the black and white where it goes color and Kim shows up. Oh man, that gives me chills.
Right.
That would-
Total goosebumps
That
right
would be
now,
good.
man.
I think, though, I will say the only reason I think that this won't happen is because that's very optimistic and that's very much a good ending, or like a very nice ending where I get the sense that
That's not Vince Gilligan's jam.
right. I mean, look at Breaking Bad. That's not how Breaking Bad.
And the
ends
10-minute black and white sequence is a story in itself. It's about him not wanting to get caught, not wanting to get unmasked. And it's this long bureaucratic nightmare because he passed out at his job. It wasn't a heart attack, but he has to go through the process of being processed
In the
and they
hospital.
can't find him in the system. And he's like, oh crap, the jig is up. They figured out that I'm not really who I say I am, but then it ends up being fine.
And then he's on
in
his
a cab,
hunches, yeah.
and the cab driver is like taking him somewhere and he's like, just let me out here. Just let me out here. Because he's super paranoid. And it's building up this extra sense of tension in just the black and white bits of just how miserable he is in this life.
Yeah. He's
because he has made all of the wrong choices, and I think if you're gonna if they want to make this the opposite of Breaking Bad, then maybe because I'm with you, right? On the one hand, you go like, are these guys gonna be optimistic about this? But if Breaking Bad was the story of someone breaking bad, right, and losing themselves, and that has to end in a bad place, right? He became a bad man. But Better Call Saul, there was no promise in the premise that this was going to be just about him becoming a bad person. So perhaps the point is to show how he lost his way, but show, unlike Walt, this man was able to find redemption, and unlike Walt, he was able to find it most importantly in being able to love someone else, because ultimately Walt cared only about himself.
Man,
no matter how much he
Sean,
pretended to love
you're
them.
making me believe even harder than I believed before. Don't stop that. I'm feeling. I've often said on the show that Breaking Bad is the inverse of The Shield. The Shield is a character who is damned from day one, and yet strangely you find yourself rooting for by the end of the show. Breaking Bad is a character that you love at the beginning, and yet by the end you realize he's damned. And it would be great to get a middle of the road thing. In fact, actually, there's for the after talk. And normally I don't plug the Patreon after talk, but there's a particular clip that I think you've seen, Bryce, that I think we should share for the after talk. That is Kurt Vonnegut talking about how there's only 3 stories. That would be fun to watch in the after talk segment and talk about it.
okay.
It doesn't track to me that his team would want to tell the same story and end it in the same place, which is ultimately like, here's a guy who tried to be good and ultimately he gave into his dark side and he lost everything. So why not bring it to a place of like, hey, you know what? And then, through sheer force of will and realizing what a bad place he had got himself into, he's going to take the first opportunity he can to turn it around. There's a lot of complications and a lot of things that have to happen for it not to feel cheap. Because like he can't destroy everything in their relationship and then she just shows up and all's forgiven, right? So there has to be more elements that start to come to play in the future stuff for this to really work.
From what you guys have described, I can picture a scenario where she definitively announces she's out and gone and seriously out of the picture, incredibly, like we believe we're never going to see her again. But then because of news or information or whatever, and watching from the outside, she chooses to come back at the end. That'd be fun.
Right. And then maybe we get a season that's just in the present day and is in color, but, is now him getting himself out of this situation. And maybe she has to choose to play one last con with him to get him out somewhere safe. And maybe that is why we're seeing them always doing these cons. And maybe
so maybe she does the comeback like look, I can't quit you. I don't respect you. I don't love you, but I do respect you enough to pull this con to get you extradited to Germany or whatever.
Maybe, yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe she owes that to him, but as of right now, I don't think that she does. He hasn't done enough in my read of their relationship. I don't think he has been respectful enough of her to deserve that. So I would be disappointed if that's what her character did without some other event happening in the meantime. I think he needs to put himself out there more for her, so that there's a reason once she's burnt for her to go like, okay, he might be a but he doesn't deserve to die or like rot in prison. And like, if I can help him get one last chance at becoming a better person, then I will. But you know, we'll see if he earns that. That's kind of the fun of the show.
Sean, did you ever watch Deadwood?
I did not.
Okay. All right. Well, then
you can do Deadwood now.
We're not done with. We would be remiss if we did not talk about the other part of the house.
Okay.
We would.
Well, then,
Yeah,
sorry,
we
I'll
would.
back.
So we also have Mike's story where I guess he's driven to fulfill some sort of work transaction by getting his first paycheck from Madrigal. And he breaks into a Madrigal office and
he does a penetration test of the Madrigal offices.
And it's great.
And then goes and confronts the security officer and says, "Look what I was able to do." And it's just it's enjoyable as hell to watch, right, Bryce? Like you just see him being Mike, being the most Mike he can be, pulling a con on everyone in Madrigal for a good cause. Like he's meant to show these vulnerabilities. It's basically what every presenter at DEF CON and Black Hat this weekend was doing, Brian.
Which, by the way, talking to the folks, I guess they have a contest in the social engineering track over at DEF CON where they decide on a target and they do not tell the target until after the fact. So a target is penetrated by social engineering techniques, and then after the fact, as a reward for having had a bunch of, people, trespass and do whatever. I'm sure they've figured it out all legally, but the reward is like, congratulations, you've just received one of the most conclusive penetration tests, the kind of thing that normally costs $10,000 to $50,000. Here's a full report of all your vulnerabilities. You're welcome. And that's what Mike's doing to Madrigal, basically, as a one-man show in this episode, and it's a joy to watch.
What was really great about it is that it feels like the other operations that Mike does, right? Whether it's sneaky, sneaking through the house of the rich people in the first season or what have you, and pretty quickly you're really not sure why he's doing. You don't even know that it's him starting the sequence, right? Because it's about the guy and his son and fixing the bike chain, and it's then when you realize, oh, Mike was taking advantage of this moment, and even once you figure out, oh well, he's just testing Madrigal. He's not trying to steal anything. He's not trying to do any espionage. He's just figuring out all of the vulnerabilities. You still get like the victory moment when he's talking to the manager, and he's got all the confidence and he's telling, you did this, no one checked me, there were no all hands on deck, these guys aren't wearing their safety stuff, this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, yeah, you do it, Mike, you get him. These shows don't tend to have a very long shelf life of bad guys doing the good thing, but I enjoyed that sequence very much.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how they keep that. I feel that Mike's character has had there's really like the least amount of growth, it seems, for when we meet him to when we meet him now in Better Call Saul.
I don't want to disagree. Like we know he's certainly on the surface we see him as a jaded, bitter bastard in Breaking Bad, and we see him as a jaded, bitter bastard at the beginning. But like that standalone episode of the detective story by when you get the context, it's his journey is a very U-shaped thing. Like we know he's pretty much at the same at the beginning, but we experience the pain that he's experienced along the way.
Yeah, but my issue is just that we've experienced that, it all happened now. We know why, and we know now, right? Like why he is how he is. And I'm just curious. I love the show. I'm curious to see how I have no doubt they will. I'm curious to see how they keep that ball moving now, right? Because I don't really want to see him be the same Mike now for 2-3 more seasons. I would like to see him I would like to see how his position within Gus's organization kind of grows and changes, and how he floats in and out of that whole situation, and why he's not someone who doesn't get brought in earlier, and why it's someone that that's Saul doesn't reach out to sooner within that series, right, when he's Saul. So I don't know, it's interesting.
And you kind of get the sense that Mike's doing it, to make the money feel like he's actually earned it. But I also think he knows he's under Gus's thumb to some degree. And if he can legitimize the work, he'd probably rather do that than get back into doing, shady business. But at the end of the day, he is going to get pulled back into Gus's power struggle with the other Mexican cartel. The Salamancas.
All right. Anything else on Better Call Saul before we move along?
One question. Is there as much nacho as I would like for there to be? Because
in this episode, no.
There was very little. Like, I kind of don't know why they hit on it this episode at all. Of like, oh, I'm gonna pick up the pills again. I'm gonna throw him off a bridge.
What's his name? Michael Mondro or
something like that.
One of my favorite. He's the best. He's the best. He's the best.
Well, too bad.
Yeah, it was.
You know who else is the best is Sean. Thank you for joining us, man, and hanging around for Spoilerin time.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. I have to return to my planet now.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you for visiting our planet.
And he's gone.
Beep, 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 beep.
Three frames
forget,
of a
folks,
cell going up.
Check out bunnyears.com. Is it bunnyears.com?
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah,
Bunny Ears.
absolutely. Check out all that stuff. And we've got to quickly finish up Deadwood, where we get to see Wyatt Earp and his brother come to town.
Separate thing. Okay, two things.
Separate
First
thing
of all,
from what?
Well, I noticed. First of all, I watched. I woke up at 4 a.m. I traveled home and I realized that I'll have nothing to talk about if I don't watch these two shows. So I watched Preacher back with Deadwood, and I realized that, man, what a wonderfully different world we live in, where a same-sex romance can be so interesting and engaging in both of those shows. In the case of Preacher, we have it with a person and a person. No spoilers if you're watching Preacher.
But you're talking about Jane?
Yeah. That was so sweet and strange. And I love that thread. I think that's my favorite thread.
And it wasn't even much.
Right.
It wasn't lingered over. It didn't take up a majority of the episode. It was very lightly treated. But and I think that made it more poignant.
Well, and plus also Preacher has the advantage of taking place in modern day, where attitudes are different, and you could imagine that it's surprising but not weird or whatever. But it's like, when I think back to what life looked like in the 1850s or whatever time this took place in. By the way, I don't even know what time did it take
place? In the 1870s.
Okay, but like that. The mere suspicion of a same-sex relationship at that time, I like the fact that they gave a nod to the type of reaction that would happen to it. And forgive me, I couldn't identify whether or not the person was a rando holding up a sign.
No, he was the proprietor of the hotel.
Wait, I thought he looked like the telegraph guy, but wondered.
No.
Okay.
You mean the guy who came out holding up the engraved quote? Yeah, he's the proprietor of the hotel. We've seen him a couple of times.
Okay, all right.
Kind of chastising Janie.
Got it. Yeah. It is the sweetest thing. It is the sweetest thing, and it is the spiritual heart of the show right now. That and the burgeoning acquiescence to the relationship between Anna Gunn and Raylan. That's probably not how they want me
Seth
to
Bullock. I finally remembered his name now.
It's so great. I liked that Another favorite scene was when they're walking along and it's like Seth Bullock is, what I liked about this episode is that they identified what was significant about publishing the letter, because publishing the letter last episode felt like such an impotent gesture. It seemed so dumb and stupid. And it's like, you're just going to publish a eulogy for somebody who died, and that's your big move or whatever. This episode, we felt that. And certainly we felt the anxiety from Seth Bullock about like, no, we've made a move and I need to know what everybody thinks. And the fact that it opens with the Telegraph guy and Principal Rooney walking around distributing the newspapers, it felt electric. And that response from Hearst, you know, like you felt his simmering rage,
his embarrassment and anger. Yeah. Correct.
And all of a sudden you realize like, oh, no, that was a very powerful move that they made. And I loved it. I loved all of this episode, but most of all, I loved the not hinted at, but very direct relational courtship of Janie and Calamity Jane.
But we see the reaction that Hearst has to the move at the very end, and there's a red herring that I didn't really eat. I didn't go after it, which was, you know, oh, the Earps are in town. So and Tolliver thinks, well, I'm going to court them for my new boss Hearst, right? And Swearingen thinks, well, you know, I better keep these guys under my thumb. There was no road agents. I won't tell. You work for me now. And it turns out that Hearst had no interest in Wyatt Earp or his brother at all. That he's got, and I'm guessing it's the Pinkertons that rode into town at the end. We don't really get them identified, but that would be period appropriate because they were an army for hire, basically, most famous for coming in for union activities and breaking up union activities. But certainly Hearst would have the money to hire them to do this.
I have never, I don't know. I'm creeping up on half a century of living, and I can't think of a single other time that I've seen Wyatt Earp portrayed as a total jackass, a useless.
Well, Morgan
piece
was
of
the bigger jackass. You thought Wyatt was a total jackass? I thought Wyatt was portrayed as sort of a half jackass, half-ass Jack.
Wyatt was portrayed, and what's funny is like by the facts. You know, I think back to like watching. I mean,
it's one of the things I love about Deadwood is you don't see anybody who's famous, Calamity Jane, Wild Bill Hickok, portrayed in that paper cutout 1950s serial version. They're all flawed, full characters, and I get the feeling that's going to be true for Wyatt Earp too.
Well, and like I vaguely remember in watching Tombstone, them having the dream of like, wouldn't it be great if we got out of the cop biz and just went off and did our thing or whatever.
Yeah.
But now we see the reverse version of that, of what it looks like to a town in Deadwood was like, I get it. You're a lawman. You killed a lot of people. And that moment that Seth explains, I understand the hunger to punch people after you've lost the badge. And I hope you're not one of those guys. And Wyatt Earp barely makes the cut of being a good person by paying for his stuff, his wares, and so on.
And again, Morgan was the one who just dumped all the stuff and then wandered off. Wyatt sort of came into like, you know, I'm not going to turn against my brother, but
Wyatt was too busy playing craps.
Wyatt's working a con of some sort. Remember, sure. He's like, how do we take advantage of our reputation? He's like, I'm going to go to Swearingen's place, then I'm going to go to Tolliver's place. You go get the hardware while I execute the plan. So he's not just playing craps, I don't think.
Right.
He's working Tolliver by doing that, and then he has to be like, crap, I gotta go see to my brother.
I don't think that makes him better in this picture. But regardless, the mere fact that all of the Earps are represented with a tarnish on their reputation, I think is a really fascinating move. Also, I've gotta. This is the episode that I've begun. I'm sorry, Tom, to resent the fact that you pointed out very precisely how they're just aping Shakespeare. And the moment that I saw it the most, yes, I've always heard that Deadwood is Shakespearean Old West or whatever. That's fine. You know, what does that phrase mean? Who cares? But when we get the soliloquy from somebody who is not E.B. Farnham, we get it from the guy who now the racist who owns the livery. And he has this whole scene with a horse where he has a conversation with a horse and then gets kicked in the head and rendered, you know, in trouble or whatever. It just makes me feel like our favorite general is now the most interesting character in the show, because I can't tell. I understand his rage. He's so interesting because he understands the world exactly as it is, deals with it exactly as it is. We see a brief moment of indulgence of hatred when he flings oatmeal in the face of the racist dude. And then we see, you know, him like, well, I don't know, I guess I'll clean this up and take care of him or whatever. Like he's now even more interesting than Swearingen in my book because he has nothing. He has absolutely nothing. And yet he's kind and a straight shooter, much like the reasons that we love Calamity Jane. But I feel like Calamity Jane has moved on to her own story, and now we get to see the Inward General, whatever his journey is. Although I'm also very aware that it gets cut off after season 3, and the next time we'll see him will be, if we see him at all, in a movie.
Well, we got a few more episodes before that happens. Anything else? The theater folks had a lot of time this episode, but it was basically putting to rest their sick friend so they can get on with creating the theater. And I felt like that was just business that led nowhere.
Oh, no. I disagree. I felt like all of that was, I think they came into town expecting to start a theater and then realized that they've lost one of their major assets in this actor who died. They don't have a good theater to work in. And so they have shifted focus to become con men. And they are now essentially offering bogus healing techniques to Hearst, which I think is, I found all of that interesting, where it's just like... Oh,
I found the bogus healing techniques gambit interesting. I don't think that's related to opening the theater or not. When I say it was a story that went nowhere, they set up this character who was sick as sort of an important thing to them, which it was. And it turns out it was important in that it was the thing delaying them from opening the theater, because they didn't want to open it without him until he got to see it. He got to see it. He died. And now they can open the theater. It doesn't really affect any other storyline there.
I took that from a totally different angle. I thought that he was a valued asset that they planned to exploit once they got there, but he died. You know, his story of dying, you know, they knew he was sick, but now he's dead, and it's like lacking that asset. Well, we certainly can't put on Shakespeare now. We have to do something else.
Oh, really? See, I never thought they planned to put on anything with him because he was so sick to begin with. I thought it was more of a loyalty story, but yeah, different ways of looking at it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, great stuff.
Well, folks, thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks again to Sean for joining us, chatting about Better Call Saul and Preacher, and we will be back to spoil you again next time.
Bunnyears.com. Go read all this stuff. Bunnyears.com. It's great.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.